What happened in Washington, D.C. today is not just another headline, and it's not one of those events the nation can scroll past and forget in 24 hours. It is the kind of incident that forces the country to look directly at the systems it has trusted for years and to confront the uncomfortable truth that those systems may no longer be working the way they were promised. 2 National Guard members were shot near the Capitol in an attack that authorities now confirm was carried out by an Afghan national who entered the United States during the evacuation period that followed the fall of Kabul. The debates that once lived on cable news and political talk shows have suddenly turned into real-world consequences that nobody can ignore. This incident immediately reignited questions that had been simmering beneath the surface. Concerns about vetting procedures, refugee screening, government accountability, and the political decisions made during the Afghan withdrawal all returned at full intensity. People who had been warning for years that the process was rushed now feel validated, while others argue that one individual's actions should not define an entire group. But regardless of which side someone stands on, the fact remains that this shooting has pushed the immigration and security debate into a level of urgency that cannot be softened or postponed. What is striking is how fast the conversation shifted from shock to political confrontation. As soon as the suspect's background was confirmed, the national dialogue exploded. The country has experienced tragedy, violence, and security breaches before. But there is something different about this moment. The location, the victims, the suspect's origins, and the political tension already gripping the nation all collided at the same time. It has become a flashpoint, something larger than the event itself, something symbolizing deeper structural issues that have been ignored for far too long. Donald Trump responded within minutes, calling the shooting an act of terror, and demanding a full review of the individuals brought into the country during the evacuation. Whether people agree with him or not, his reaction shaped the national atmosphere instantly. It intensified the scrutiny, amplified the anger, and pushed this incident from a crime report into a full national debate about safety, migration, responsibility, and the government's ability to protect its own citizens. For millions of Americans, especially those already skeptical of immigration decisions made over the past decade, this moment confirmed their fears. For others, it raised concerns about political opportunism and the weaponization of tragedy. The situation has become a mirror reflecting something deeper: the growing feeling that America is becoming less secure, less stable, and less sure of its own direction. People are questioning not only this specific case, but the larger pattern of failures happening across different institutions. The shooting has exposed vulnerabilities that many assumed were being monitored, and now, as the nation tries to process what happened, a serious conversation is forming about whether the systems designed to prevent these kinds of incidents are capable of keeping up with the complexity of modern threats. The event has also triggered global attention. When violence occurs inside the capital region, especially involving individuals linked to foreign conflicts, the world watches closely. Governments, analysts, and observers outside the U.S. are already discussing whether this is an isolated event or a sign of wider instability in one of the most powerful nations on Earth. It is not just Americans who are uneasy. International partners are reassessing what incidents like this reveal about shifting U.S. policies and security gaps. What makes this moment especially significant is not simply the act itself, but the timing. The country is already dealing with political division, economic pressure, rising social anger, and external global tensions. An attack involving a foreign national in the nation's capital adds another layer to an already overwhelmed national atmosphere. It presses the question that people have been silently asking for months: is America entering a period where its internal vulnerabilities are starting to collide all at once? This is the environment the nation wakes up to now, an environment where one event instantly exposes everything the public has been uneasy about. And while investigators continue working, the larger issue remains clear. This shooting is not just a violent attack. It is a symbol of the deeper cracks forming underneath the surface of the country. Cracks that can no longer be ignored or downplayed. The political reaction to this incident developed faster than the investigation itself, and that alone shows how fragile the national atmosphere has become. The moment the identity of the suspect reached the public, the conversation shifted from law enforcement to politics, from facts to interpretation, from a shooting to a symbolic battle over what kind of country the United States is becoming. And because political tensions were already elevated, this single event instantly became a turning point in how leaders respond to security failures. Donald Trump's reaction was immediate, forceful, and calculated to make a statement, not only about this incident, but about the broader immigration system that he has criticized for years. By labeling the act as terrorism before official agencies had completed their assessment, he created the framework through which millions of people are now viewing the situation. This is the kind of moment where political narratives matter more than official reports. When a former president defines an event in a single sentence, that definition spreads across media, across social networks, and across public perception long before law enforcement releases any definitive conclusions. Trump pushed the issue directly into the national bloodstream by linking the shooting to the failures of past administrations. He emphasized what he views as a reckless approach to refugee intake, especially during periods of crisis when vetting processes become rushed or incomplete. Supporters of this view argue that the government prioritized speed over security. Critics argue that Trump's remarks deepen fear and division. But either way, the reaction is shaping the debate far more aggressively than any official statement from federal agencies. What is undeniable is that Trump touched on concerns that already existed among a large part of the population. Many Americans have felt for years that political decision-making around immigration, especially during chaotic global events, has been inconsistent and dangerously reactive. The shooting provided a moment where those long-standing frustrations could resurface, and once they resurfaced, they did not stay contained. Governors, senators, and congressional leaders began issuing their own statements. Some demanded immediate reviews of refugee programs. Others warned that political exploitation of tragedy could fuel xenophobia. The divide widened instantly, and instead of addressing the incident as an isolated event, the country fell into a predictable and deeply polarizing pattern. The Biden administration, already under pressure for a range of internal and international issues, found itself forced into a defensive posture. Officials quickly announced a temporary pause on certain asylum screenings related to Afghan applicants, a move that clearly aimed to calm public concern but simultaneously acknowledged that something in the system may not have been functioning as intended. This admission, even without full investigation results, added more weight to the argument that the vetting process during the evacuation period may not have been as secure as officials once claimed. For the administration, this moment represents a difficult balance, attempting to assure the public while not conceding a sweeping systemic failure. What makes this politically destabilizing is not simply the shooting itself, but the broader implication. If even one improperly vetted individual can carry out a violent attack near the Capitol, it raises doubts about the reliability of the entire process. That doubt becomes political ammunition. It becomes social anxiety. It becomes a talking point for every candidate, commentator, and influencer who has ever warned about the consequences of rapid entry immigration systems. The shooting has now become a case study that will be referenced indefinitely, regardless of the final investigative outcome. Meanwhile, public trust continues to erode. People are no longer asking whether the shooting was politically motivated. They are asking whether the government is capable of making decisions that prioritize national security without letting political pressure dictate the pace. The sense of instability that already existed in American politics has intensified, and this incident has exposed the level of volatility inside the system. The political climate has reached a point where every crisis becomes a referendum on leadership, competence, and national identity. This is why the fallout is so significant. The reactions from politicians are not just about condemning violence, they are attempts to shape the nation's mindset. And in a country already struggling with division, fear, and mistrust in institutions, those attempts have consequences far beyond the immediate moment. The shooting may have lasted only seconds, but the political shockwave it created will influence debates, policies, and public sentiment for months, possibly years. As the political confrontation intensified, the country began turning inward, and the discussion around this shooting quickly evolved into something much larger than the event itself. The debate no longer centered only on what happened, but on what it represents in a nation already weighed down by tension, mistrust, and competing narratives about what direction America is heading in. The divisions that were already visible, political, cultural, ideological, have now widened in a way that shows just how fragile the public atmosphere has become. In the aftermath of the attack, different communities reacted through their own lenses. Conservative commentators immediately framed the incident as evidence of systemic failure within immigration policy, pointing to it as the inevitable outcome of decisions made during periods of geopolitical crisis. They emphasized the theme of national security, arguing that America has weakened its protective barriers and exposed itself to unnecessary risks. On the other side, progressive voices warned that politicizing the event would deepen hostility toward refugees and immigrant communities who had nothing to do with the attack. They stressed that individual actions should not define an entire group, and that broad generalizations could inflame tensions in ways that create more harm than security. The disagreement did not stay confined to political circles. It spread across social media, workplaces, universities, and community spaces. People began questioning each other's motives, values, and identities, turning a national security conversation into a broader cultural clash. The speed of online conversations accelerated the division. Each platform amplified the loudest, angriest voices, pushing moderate perspectives out of the frame. Instead of a unified response to a crisis, America saw yet another example of how quickly a tragedy can be absorbed into the country's ever-growing ideological split. Inside the government, agencies found themselves under unprecedented pressure. The Department of Homeland Security, federal law enforcement, and intelligence agencies were forced into a defensive position. Officials were required to explain how the suspect was screened, what information was available at the time, and whether any warnings or risks were overlooked. Even before the investigation reached any conclusions, many Americans assumed there had been a failure. This assumption reflects a deeper issue. The public's trust in government systems has eroded to such an extent that many believe mistakes are not just possible, they are inevitable. This erosion of trust is not new, but the shooting has magnified it. The country has experienced years of political turbulence, misinformation, institutional contradictions, and inconsistent policies. Each incident adds another layer to an ongoing sense of national instability. This latest event did not create the mistrust. It simply exposed how widespread and deeply embedded it has become. Even people who typically avoid political debates find themselves questioning the reliability of the system that is supposed to keep them safe. International observers have also taken notice. The United States has often presented itself as the global standard for security, stability, and institutional order. But events like this challenge that perception. Analysts in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East are discussing whether the U.S. is entering a period of chronic internal vulnerability, where political polarization and administrative dysfunction undermine its ability to respond effectively to crises. When foreign governments start questioning the stability of America's internal systems, it is a sign that the perception of American strength is shifting on a global scale. Domestically, this incident has intensified the emotional fatigue many Americans are experiencing. People are dealing with economic pressure, social tension, and constant political conflict. An attack near the Capitol by someone who entered the country through a high-profile evacuation adds yet another layer of anxiety. It reinforces the belief that instability is becoming the norm, not the exception. And when instability becomes expected, public behavior changes. People become more defensive, more skeptical, more polarized, and more likely to align themselves with extreme positions simply because they no longer trust the center to hold. This is the broader context into which the D.C. shooting has landed. It is not just about one act of violence. It is about the environment that allowed it to become a national crisis so quickly. It shows how close the country is to the edge, how stretched its institutions are, and how easily one event can ignite deep-seated fears. In a society where division and distrust have become defining features, almost any major incident becomes a catalyst for conflict. And right now, the nation is dealing with the consequences of that reality in real time. While the country was still processing the impact of the D.C. attack, another tragedy forced its way into the national conversation, and this one struck in a place that Americans fear the most: another shooting involving children. It happened in a completely different city, unrelated to the initial attack, unrelated to immigration or foreign conflict, yet it carried an emotional weight that no political argument can soften. News outlets began reporting that multiple children had been shot in a separate incident, and suddenly, the debate over national security expanded into something far more unsettling. It wasn't just a question of border failures or vetting mistakes anymore. It became a question of whether the country is losing control of its ability to protect its most vulnerable citizens. The timing of this second tragedy intensified everything. America was already shaken by the violence near the Capitol, already debating political responsibility, already questioning the competence of its institutions. And then, within hours, headlines shifted toward children being caught in another act of senseless violence. In a country where school shootings and youth-related tragedies have become disturbingly common, this incident served as a harsh reminder that instability is not only external. It exists inside neighborhoods, inside communities, inside schools, and inside the lives of families who are simply trying to survive the daily reality of living in a nation where danger can erupt anywhere. The emotional impact was immediate. Parents across the country reacted not as political supporters of one side or the other, but as people who understood exactly what it means to fear for their children's safety. This is the kind of tragedy that bypasses ideology and goes straight to the human instinct to protect. While leaders argued over the implications of the D.C. shooting, the children's incident exposed a deeper, more painful truth. America is facing multiple layers of vulnerability at the same time. External threats, internal violence, political division, and weakened public trust are all converging into a single picture of national instability. Politicians quickly responded to the children's shooting, but their responses only highlighted how fractured the national landscape has become. Some demanded stronger gun control measures. Others argued that mental health resources are failing. Others blamed cultural decay or the lack of community structures. The arguments were predictable, and yet none of them addressed the larger issue that both shootings, though unrelated, symbolize: a country where institutions designed to provide security are struggling to meet the moment. The D.C. attack questioned the reliability of federal-level systems. The children's tragedy questioned the reliability of local and community-level systems. Together, they created the sense that the nation is exposed on all fronts. What made this moment even more volatile was how quickly the two incidents became part of the same national discussion. Commentators began linking them together as evidence of a deeper societal unraveling. Analysts described the situation as a reflection of a country experiencing simultaneous breakdowns in policy, accountability, and community safety. The public, already overwhelmed by political tension and economic pressure, felt the combined weight of these events in a way that intensified the sense of national decline. The tragedy involving children struck at a level that political debates cannot fully articulate. It reminded the country that violence in America is not just a matter of ideology or immigration. It is a symptom of a society under strain. Parents, teachers, and community leaders voiced the same fear. If both foreign-related violence and domestic violence are happening in the same news cycle, what does that say about the stability of the country? Is the nation prepared to address these crises simultaneously? And if not, what does that mean for the future? The combination of these incidents has forced the country into a moment of painful reflection. It is no longer enough to blame one political figure, one policy choice, one community, or one institution. The deeper issue is that multiple systems are failing at the same time, leaving ordinary people feeling unprotected and uncertain about the direction the country is heading. The children's shooting made that reality impossible to ignore. It underscored the emotional, moral, and societal cost of living in a nation where these kinds of tragedies have become part of the public rhythm, happening with such frequency that the country barely has time to recover from one before the next arrives. The overlapping impact of both incidents has pushed the country into a moment where people are questioning the direction of the United States with more urgency than at any point in recent years. It is not simply that violence has occurred in two different cities. It is that each incident exposes a different weakness inside the national structure, and when viewed together, they create a picture that is difficult to ignore. Americans are now confronted with the reality that the systems they rely on, federal security, community protection, political leadership, and social stability, are experiencing strain simultaneously. This convergence is shaping public perception in ways that will have long-term consequences for how the country operates and how citizens view their own safety. The events of these days revealed something that many people have sensed but have been reluctant to say openly. The belief that the nation is reaching a point where crises are no longer isolated. Instead, they are appearing at the same time, in different places, for different reasons, yet all pointing to the same conclusion, that instability is becoming a structural feature of American life. The conversation is no longer centered on individual tragedies, but on the pattern they represent. A country already navigating political division, economic pressure, and international uncertainty now faces the added weight of internal security concerns that span from the capital to local neighborhoods. This raises difficult questions about governance, competence, and the ability of institutions to adapt to a rapidly changing environment. Every federal agency, every local authority, and every political leader now faces the same scrutiny. Are they capable of addressing threats that emerge from multiple directions at once? The public is not looking for speeches or symbolic gestures. They are looking for proof that the system is functional, that decision-makers understand the urgency of the moment, and that the country is not drifting into a cycle where each new crisis is met with the same familiar pattern of political argument and institutional hesitation. International observers have long used terms like polarization, institutional fatigue, and domestic volatility when assessing the United States. But now these assessments carry more weight because the evidence is visible in real time. Allies are watching closely because American stability often dictates global stability. When the U.S. experiences internal disruptions, especially those involving national security or violence against children, it sends ripple effects through diplomatic relationships, economic markets, and geopolitical strategies. Even adversaries interpret these moments as signals that the country is more vulnerable internally than its outward image suggests. Inside the U.S., the response from citizens reflects a growing belief that the traditional assurances, statements from officials, promises of investigations, speeches about unity, are no longer enough to address the anxiety people are living with. Many Americans feel that the pace of crises is accelerating, while the pace of solutions remains the same. The disconnection between the scale of the problems and the responsiveness of institutions is fueling a sense of national exhaustion. People are tired of reacting to tragedies and immediately being told to move on. They are tired of watching political leaders use the same language after every incident. And they are tired of feeling like the country is drifting without a clear plan to restore stability. These events have forced a re-examination of what national security actually means. It is no longer limited to threats from abroad or armed conflicts in distant regions. It includes the reliability of domestic systems, the safety of communities, and the ability of the country to respond to multiple crises without fracturing under the pressure. The shooting near the Capitol exposed weaknesses in federal-level oversight, while the tragedy involving children exposed weaknesses in community-level protection. Together, they present a sobering picture of a nation where vulnerabilities exist at every tier. For millions of people watching these developments, the fear is not rooted in a single incident, but in the realization that these incidents reflect deeper structural issues. When children cannot be protected in their own communities, and when threats can appear even in one of the most secure regions of the country, the question becomes something larger than politics. It becomes a question about the future direction of the United States and whether the country is prepared to confront the growing complexity of the challenges it faces. The feeling spreading across the nation is that America is entering a period where crises are no longer temporary disruptions. They are indicators of a system under strain. And unless there is a meaningful response, many fear these incidents will not be remembered as isolated moments, but as early signs of a broader turning point in the nation's stability.